Jim, how would you recap what you saw last night from start to finish?
Interesting. Coming in, I think we knew what to expect. Coming to a strong military town, you knew there was going to be some backlash against Colin. But there also were a number of supporters for Colin, in the stands, a number of 49er fans. What I found most interesting is that in talking to players and coaches from both teams, just how much support was really there for him. I mean, I knew, having talked to some players prior to that, but once you got there and you were able to look guys in the eye and really feel and sense, their feelings about the situation, I was really struck by it. And one 49er player in particular told me that if he had known Colin was going to make this silent protest, initially, that he would have taken a knee with him or sat with him. So I think that's the thing that their outsiders and the noise wants to say this is a distraction and what team's going to put up with this. And I can tell you, Dan, across the league, players firmly support Colin in terms of the message he's trying to get out there. They might not necessarily agree with the method, but they definitely support the message.
How did he perform?
I thought he performed okay. I mean, the first drive was important from the standpoint of, look, he hasn't played good football for several years now. And, in fact, the last few, he's been regressing, you could make the case. And he had a terrible preseason game, prior to this one. And so to go out in a hostile environment where he knew so much attention was going to be focused on him, and to take them down the field on the opening drive, overcome a couple of penalties, and put them in the end zone, that was big. Now, you can say he was playing against backups and they weren't game planning, but he also was playing with backups. So from that standpoint, you can make the case that the field was somewhat level. But, it's going to be interesting to me the next couple of days because already I'm hearing this talk, well, now the 49ers have to keep him. The reality is he wasn't going anywhere based on this. If Chip Kelly came out earlier in the week and said he's one of our two best quarterbacks, so if the 49ers had released him by Saturday, then they would have given off the perception that this was a political action instead of a football decision. And that's why I'm saying to you, I couldn't see any way that he was going to be released going into week one. I still don't see it.
The question I would want to ask him if I'm Chip Kelly is, what are you? Are you a social activist moonlighting as a quarterback, or are you a quarterback moonlighting as a social activist? Can you do both?
I think Colin answered that last night where he essentially said, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. He said, I spend 12 hours a day at the facility with my teammates, with my coaches and meetings and everything else. And once I leave there, what I do on my own time is my time. So if you're asking him, I think he's going to tell you he can do both. And I find it fascinating when people say, well, why now? As if there's some sort of timetable for when young men have social awakenings. And if you talk to Colin again, if you look in his eyes and you talk to people around him, there is the real sense that this is very genuine. And he has come into this at his own time, in terms of being socially aware and wanting to address certain issues. So, I firmly believe that this is real, that Colin believes that he can be an effective quarterback and that he can also try and heighten the discussion about something that he's very passionate about and feels serious about.
Yeah, I've tried to tell my audience, you may not like the message or how the message is delivered. I think that's what bothers a lot of people. But I said, listen to the message first. And we've moved away from what he said initially, and that's what bothered me. I may not like that he is kneeling, but I'm not walking in his shoes. I can only try to understand what he is representing or what he's seen or what he's heard. I can't sit here in my, lily white palace and say, man, how can you do that? Discrediting, the American flag. I think if he had to frame it different, frame it again, he'd frame it a little bit different, not softer, but different, because I think it came out that it was against the military instead of this is about the police, and that flag is not protecting me the way it does white America. If he had a mulligan, would he do it differently?
I'm not so sure that he would, Dan, because I asked him specifically last night. I said, how disappointed are you that the further we get away from people noticing your initial protests, that we've discussed everything but the message behind your protest.
Yeah.
We've discussed your method. We've discussed the national anthem, the history of it, the author of it. We've discussed whether or not we should even have a national anthem. And all of a sudden, this is morphed into Colin doesn't respect the media, when, in fact, if you go back and you listen to his initial press conference, he never said anything about the media in terms of disrespecting it. It's always been on point about police brutality, systematic police brutality and the oppression of people of color. So it's funny that people then start to apply their own beliefs to what the flag means and everything else. And you're right. We get further and further away from the message. And that's why I continue to ask every day when this story comes up, okay, we've talked about all these other things, but when are we actually going to have a dialogue about his message? And Colin said last night, he goes, it's a tough discussion to have, and he believes that's part of the reason that people aren't talking about it and are talking about all of these other things.
He's Jim Trotter, covers the NFL for ESPN, joining us, Dan Patrick Show. I mentioned last hour that DeMarcus Cousins is doing something, and I said, most of you don't even know what he's doing. And he went to his he's going to his hometown of Mobile, Alabama, to get together with the community and the police force to unite and understand, to build trust. But nobody's talking about DeMarcus Cousins doing something like that. Why?
Correct. Because, one, I think that, again, this is a tough discussion to have. And, look, it's always easier, in my opinion, to find fault than to get behind something that may make you a little bit uncomfortable but is the right thing to do. So from that standpoint, the thing, last night Colin said he's going to donate the first $1 million of his salary to organizations that are fighting for humanity and for social justice. Now, I asked him specifically, which organizations are you talking to right now? And he didn't want to get into it at that point. But the thing that he said is, he goes, look, I want to go into communities. I want to help. I want to be a part of the solution. And therefore, I think with that sort of call to arms by him, I think you're going to see more players doing that and getting out. And I think it's fantastic. So, ultimately, I stand back somewhat and I watch what has been the reaction to him and how we get distracted with all of these other things. And then I talk to these athletes, particularly the ones last night, who tell me, you can see this matters to them, because particularly with the black athlete, as they were saying to me, look, we all know someone who's been impacted by this. If it hasn't been us, ourselves, and something needs to be done about it. And I think that people are looking for direction on it, and it is a tough discussion to have. But I think until you can acknowledge that there is a problem, there's really no reason to have the discussion, because it's not going to go anywhere. And so I think Colin and hopefully some of the other players around the NFL, start to bring this to the forefront in terms of people actually do sit down and have discussions about ways to correct, what are some social injustices.
Second biggest headline story from the preseason is what?
Oh, my God, Dan, I've been so tied up on Colin all week. I think probably you could talk about the Cowboys with Romo out and how is Dak Prescott going to play. I think that's big. How do the Patriots handle life without Tom Brady for 4 weeks, even though I don't think that that's such a big deal. I think that they'll be fine without him during this short spell. And then when he comes back, I think they just hit the ground running.
Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah, but, look, no doubt that impacts the Vikings. But I think if you're talking about really the unknown, when I look at a team like Dallas and an NFC East that's wide open, that's what I focus on. And then all of the things behind Tom Brady being out and the way that the league handled it. And people are going to have their feelings on whether or not it was just or not. This is the first season opener Tom's going to miss since when? Back in, I can't even remember what year it was, 2000, maybe 2001, I'm not sure. So from that standpoint, I think those would be the two that stand out to me.
Great stuff, Jim. Thanks for joining us, and safe travels.
Dan, thanks for having me.
That's Jim Trotter, ESPN NFL writer.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.